evening, wherever you are. And welcome to the 5th session of the 2022 BIM International Seminar, organized by the BIM Initiative. My name is Sergio Alvarez, and I will be the host and moderator for this session. BIM Initiative is an academic group with members of 21 organizations from 8 different countries. And our goal is to connect the students and faculty with leaders and experts on information management and technology innovation in the architecture, engineering, construction, and operation industry. The 2022 International BIM Seminar was created aligned with this mission. And this is why we have invited to participate as a speaker in this humble event, people who are making the difference and game changers, to share their experience and point of view on how to move forward and pursuing excellence in this industry that we participate in, and that has no borders or nations, so we are worldwide. We have so far in this seminar 1,367 people registered. Just a few minutes ago, I checked with Moises the number, registered from 32 countries all over the world. So we thank you all the participants for your interest in this event. Today we have with us John Messner, and we are very grateful that we are able to make some room in your very tight agenda and allow us to steal you for a couple of hours, John. I met John Messner on December 2010, I think it is, in a dinner that was prior to the BIM Forum conference in Washington, DC. And he was about to present in that time the version #1 of the BIM Project Execution Planning Guide. This marvelous document that has helped us to understand and to implement BIM in our projects for a little bit more than a decade right now. And we have a very interesting dinner that night. I was fascinated and trying to catch up with the conversation that he and the other BIM experts were having. And on the following days, after the conference, he was so kind to keep me in the loop with a trail of emails following up the dinner conversation. And John, if you are okay with that, I'm going to ambush you here. And I want to project in the screen an extract from that email, if that is okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, this is the beginning of the email. And he said in his email, education needs to change. Everyone knows that. Also, there is a different rate of change in different academic institutions and different levels of importance places on the need. So key questions: how should we change? And the approaches: we can lead, we can follow, or we become obsolete. So that's the kind of conversation that you will have, you can expect from John Messner in a dinner. In case that you have the opportunity, be prepared, because he's going to charge you with this kind of questions. And it's very clear for me what approach you decide to go for. I'm pretty sure that you are a leader, and this is why you are here right now. So I'm going to present a video with a more formal introduction of you, John. And then after that, I will let you the stage for your presentation.
John Messner is the Charles and Eleanor Matz Professor of Architectural Engineering and the Director of the Computer Integrated Construction Research Program at Penn State. He specializes in building information modeling, digital twin, and automation in construction research and development. John led several initiatives focused on standardizing BIM planning processes and organizational adoption of BIM. He also currently chairs the U.S. National BIM Standards Project Committee at the National Institute of Building Sciences, and he is a member of the Board of Directors at the Lean Construction Institute. Let's give a warm welcome to John Messner.
Okay, with that, I will finish my presentation, and I let the stage to you, John. Just a friendly reminder to our audience, during the presentation of John Messner, your mics will be muted. And after the presentation, you can open your mics if you want, and you need to ask for an intervention if you want to directly speak to John Messner. During the presentation, you can express your questions through the chat in the Zoom or in the Zoom and in the YouTube channel also. We will ask your questions to John Messner after the presentation. So John, the stage is yours.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. And Sergio, thank you for such a kind and warm introduction there, and for pulling up some history that I did not remember that email that I sent, to be honest, but thank you so much for sharing that. So it is such a pleasure to join you here today to talk about some of the work that we've been engaged in the past, and some of the current things that we're doing right now to really look at how we can continue to improve our planning activities for the adoption of building information modeling, and really so that we can improve overall project delivery. But in specifically today, I also want to just highlight some of the value of standardizing this process to be able to improve innovation and efficiency on projects. So I'd just like to give a very brief introduction of where I come from here at Penn State University. So if you've never had the opportunity to visit Penn State, certainly would always want to welcome all of you here. So Penn State is in the state of Pennsylvania. We are the land-grant University of Pennsylvania. We're quite a large university here at Penn State, with about 45,000 students on our main campus, which is where I'm located, as well as many other students at our other college locations here in Pennsylvania. And I have the opportunity to be the director for the Computer Integrated Construction Research Program here at Penn State. Our research program has been around for many years. I was fortunate enough when I was much younger to be a graduate student in the CIC research program, which was founded by Victor Sanvito more than 30 years ago. And so I came back to direct that program 21 years ago after being out in industry for a while. And we've really focused our research efforts in a couple of key areas. And I've listed some of these areas on the screen here, but we've certainly been focused on how we can leverage technology in general to improve the overall delivery and operations of our capital assets. And so building information modeling plays a key role in that. We also do a lot of research and visualization, including augmented and virtual reality, and a lot of research in lean project delivery and overall process improvement on projects. And so what I'm going to focus on in today's talk is looking at our research activities specifically focused on building information modeling. And I'd just like to start off by framing this in a position of, building information modeling, or maybe more accurately, building information management, I think really lies at the heart of us achieving some of the overall things that we want to do and get out of our capital facility projects in the future. And we've seen a lot of emphasis, very, very important emphasis, on increasing overall sustainability in our built assets. And I think that is critical. And I think we've also seen a change and a shift towards some more integrated delivery approaches of our projects, which I also think is absolutely critical to developing better projects. But I feel like BIM, or building information management, is really the glue that helps us inform the teams in the overall delivery of projects to be able to create more sustainable environments. And so that's one of the reasons that I just feel so passionate about what we do within the arena of building information management. And I'm going to start off just with some reminders of what we can achieve with building information modeling and building information management. Probably nothing new to any of you who are joining, but it's also an opportunity for me to show some good examples of models, because after these slides, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is related to how we manage this information and not really the details of how to create these models. But I think when we look at building information modeling and building information management, we can use BIM for a lot of tasks on our projects. For example, we can author the design models, certainly the foundation of a lot of what we do, leveraging parametric BIM authoring tools that allow us to create efficient designs and embed the information that we need to do many other tasks from those foundational design models. We can then do things like perform design reviews. This is one of our buildings here at Penn State, built a little more than 5 years ago now, where we leveraged BIM for many different use cases on that Millennium Science building. This is one of their design models that we reviewed in a large immersive display system here at the university. We can perform 3D coordination. Certainly some of the lowest hanging fruit of finding value in BIM is to be able to leverage these models, be able to perform coordination and avoid field conflicts that we all know are extremely costly, and as well as overall reducing the performance on the project when people have to move one project or one item if it's in the wrong location. We can also do detailed constructability reviews of our projects. This is from one of our earliest projects here at Penn State, where we have pretty detailed BIM requirements in our facilities group on all of our projects. This is from a law school building that we built probably 7 or 8 years ago, looking at how the steel connections were working and really coordinating the constructability of this with some of the concrete work in the future. And we can also do time sequenced or 4D models to look at overall project phasing, to evaluate detailed construction sequencing. This is just a really high level 4D model here looking at phasing. Certainly we've seen many examples of much more detailed construction sequencing and how we can then find conflicts in our schedule and really optimize the installation sequence of those elements. We can perform detailed engineering analysis. This is one of the great things about BIM once we've developed design models, is to be able to leverage those models to do daylighting, energy models, structural design, and many other types of engineering analysis. We often have challenges with our interoperability associated with doing some of these tasks, and I think that's one of the things that we continue to seek opportunities to improve that overall interoperability. Another popular use case for BIM is to leverage some of our reality capture technologies to create existing condition models. We can use laser scanning, photogrammetry, or simply just author an existing condition model off of a survey. But I think the ability for us to represent what is actually out in the field in an accurate way is an important use case for BIM. Frequently starts some of that process. But as we get toward the end of the delivery phase and moving toward the operation phase, I think one of the key uses of BIM is to develop and document a record model. What we're now starting to look into is really transitioning from the delivery to having more of an operational digital twin, having this representation where we can maintain the information that we need in this operational model that contains important information to use both in operations as well as to leverage for future renovations and retrofit. And then ultimately, we can also leverage that information in the overall asset maintenance and operations processes. It's just a simple view from our asset management system that we use here at Penn State. What we're doing now is we're taking our building information models that we get from our delivery teams here at the university. We have an asset list of all of the components and attributes of the assets in the building, and we bring that information directly into our asset maintenance system so that we can leverage that information as we move forward. And so that's just a number of the use cases that we can leverage when we look at building information modeling and building information management. I guess the key question is, why do we do this? And I just put up a couple of the reasons that I think are most important for why we would leverage BIM throughout the life cycle of a project. Some of the things that we've seen here within our own facilities group, as well as certainly many have performed research in this area and have different case studies and documentation of these benefits of BIM adoption are to reduce both the initial cost and the overall life cycle cost of our building, hopefully getting better quality. I think BIM has also been shown, when effectively planned and implemented, to really increase efficiency of our delivery process. I think that can be really valuable. We've seen some great examples of leveraging this information for safety purposes, both designed for safety, as well as looking at overall monitoring of the construction and maintenance process. I think it's been shown if we can leverage this information for analysis, we can create more sustainable buildings. And overall, this BIM process can support and enable additional innovation on a project. But all of these benefits can really only be achieved if there is a good plan in place. And so I've spent a number of years of my life looking at this topic of how do we effectively plan out the strategy for implementing building information management across the life cycle of a project. And what I want to talk about throughout the rest of my presentation is really looking at this from two different perspectives. One is to go back and look at some of the work that we've done related to putting together processes for teams to go through and create a BIM execution plan for their project. And then I also want to look at ISO 19650, which I know for many of you may be a topic of discussion, and international standard, really looking at how to manage information throughout the life cycle of facilities, and as well as within an owner organization. And so I'll compare some of the things that we have done in the past, as well as are currently updating in our BIM execution plan with the ISO framework, and give some concluding thoughts on where I think we could benefit from some increased attention as we move forward. I think it's always important to start with a definition of BIM, since unfortunately there are so many of them. So just for my purposes, as I use the BIM terminology throughout the presentation, I'm going to leverage back to an old definition of BIM, which is the definition that I usually leverage in presentations that I give, which is kind of the three different aspects of BIM. And I only wrote one of the words up there, building information modeling. But when we say BIM first, BIM can be a product, the building information model. That is the digital representation of the data. It can be a process, hopefully a collaborative process, where we are creating the models and looking at how we leverage open standards to be able to develop those building information models. But I'm going to focus more on the last one, which is really looking at building information management and how we manage the information from inception to overall operations and maintenance of a facility. So when I leverage the term BIM throughout this, I'll more frequently be referring to this information management process, which I also think aligns a lot more with the evolving and maturing conversations throughout the world related to information management standards, which I think is very important. And so as we walk through this presentation, I'll really focus on that building information management. And so some of you may be familiar with some of the work that we've performed initially in Sergio. Really appreciate your introduction there and the conference where we met, where we were presenting some of this very initial work on the BIM project execution planning guide. We were fortunate enough to get this project as a research initiative from the Charles Penn Foundation as a lead, along with the Construction Industry Institute and several other partners, to look at how can a project team plan out their implementation and adoption strategy of building information modeling at the very early stages of a project. We then continued on and developed a couple of other resources, one focused on facility owners, another one on BIM uses, and then one focused a bit more specifically on construction. But I want to really talk about the overall process framework that we put in place for this planning process for BIM. And when I look at reflecting back on the BIM execution planning document, I'm going to use a couple of terms throughout the rest of this presentation. One is just looking at a BIM execution plan. And as we defined it years ago, the BIM execution plan is a plan developed by the team that defines how BIM will be implemented throughout the project lifecycle. And we put together a procedure to help a team develop that plan. And that included 5 stages. Actually, in the original documents, it included 4 stages. I'll talk about that. But we more recently updated the BIM execution planning procedure to have 5 key stages, which are defined in version 3 of our execution planning guide. So I just want to briefly walk through these 5 stages and outline the overall planning procedure. And the first 2 of these stages or steps are in the original version of our execution planning procedure were combined, but we felt from some from watching teams and some feedback from teams that it was important to separate these. And so the first step in this was really to identify what are your overall project goals and how can BIM help support these goals. And in the beginning, we lumped this with the BIM uses and said, hey, figure out your goals and your uses. But I think it's really important that we think about the goal. Why is it that we really want to adopt BIM on a project, and how can that help us? And so a lot of times people, I think, don't spend enough time considering these goals and considering what use cases of BIM could support them. So this just shows a simple example of the goal. By the way, the BIM execution planning document, which is freely available, goes through each of these steps in more detail. The second thing that we recommended in this procedure was, once a team identifies their goals, is to really focus on what uses of BIM would help support that goal. You'll notice one thing here is this diagram seems a bit backwards, right? So it has the project phases across the top, and we're used to thinking about that as a plan, design, construct, and operate. We plan the facility, we design it, we build it, and we operate it. One of the key things that we learned as we were going through this planning process is that it's frequently better to think about this in reverse. Me as an owner, or the owner on the project, what are they going to benefit from an information management perspective in operations? And do they want the information from the delivery process to be able to bring that information into their own information management systems to operate and maintain the facility? And the answer may be yes or no, or it may just be one isolated use case like space management or maintenance management. But it's important to understand what those use cases of that information are in the operations phase before we make decisions on which use cases we may want to adopt in construction and then design and then planning. So this way of beginning with the end in mind, starting about thinking about the ultimate place that we want this information to go, I think can frequently drive an increased set of use cases for BIM on projects, and can also inform project team members on where their information is going to go and what people will rely upon that information for. So I think this is important. By the way, for the BIM execution planning procedure, we also define these 25 use cases. There are many different lists now of BIM uses, anywhere from 25 to 50 to we are redesigning some for the next version of the National BIM standard. But these 25 were use cases that we saw being leveraged on projects. By the way, you'll see some darker ones there of the capture existing condition, author the design model, coordinate, review, and compile the record model. These 5 were the 5 use cases that were defined in a later document focused on the National BIM Guide for Owners as essential uses that every project should consider adopting if they're implementing BIM on that project. And then we identified the others as enhanced uses. By the way, those 5 are also being embedded in the core next version of the US National BIM standard as required BIM use cases. And the next step that we looked at is once you identify your BIM uses, then to put together the overall process and design this process and understand in this diagram, the boxes on the top are our overall BIM uses, and the items on the bottom are the information exchanges, essentially identifying when is one entity who performs one of these BIM uses, what's their output or their information exchange that's going to go to the next follow-on use case. And so I think it's just important for teams to think about this process and to think about where their information will be going and what the follow-on procedures and people will use that information for in the future. And then in order to organize these information exchanges that are identified on that previous process, it's important to map out what needs to be in these information exchanges. This diagram here shows an older way of mapping that information exchange out, but in our newer version, we've really leveraged some of the concepts of the level of development specification, which I know there are many different ways to look at this level of development specification, but we're really leveraging the LOD specification, recommending people leverage something like the BIM Forum LOD standards or any other standardized approach to document at what level the geometric information should be complete, as well as what type of information attributes need to be in these different exchanges. This diagram just shows the BIM Forums, just a diagrammatic list of the BIM Forums LOD specification, which has a 100, 200, 300, 350, and 400, looking at it going from an initial massing to an overall detailed components that we would build and then ultimately document in the as-built model. These are all documented in the, again, the BIM forums LOD specification, which again is also a freely available resource to everybody. And the last item is to really design the supporting infrastructure around the process. We put this as the last step in the procedure to really make sure that teams think about their process, think about their information exchanges before they think about maybe some of the more detailed items, like what kind of computing infrastructure do I need? What kind of meetings do I need to have? And what quality control processes and procedures might I put in place? We essentially documented these infrastructure items as items in a templated BIM execution plan. We're in the process of updating this template and this list of information that's needed for this infrastructure in our ongoing efforts for the National BIM standard. And so one thing we did, we developed this procedure 10 years ago now, more than 10 years ago now. We put it out into the industry and got a lot of feedback from industry related to this project. By the way, we worked with some great team partners on this, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, our own facilities group here at Penn State, as well as a number of other great teams to really implement this procedure on their projects and then give us feedback on that procedure. We ultimately documented this in the U.S. National BIM standard in version 2 and 3 of that National BIM standard. And so that is one area that I think is interesting because we've come back to that National BIM standard now more than 10 years ago. I've always been pretty actively engaged in that. But we're now looking at how we can improve this procedure and improve the overall template of information in this collaborative process. But BIM has certainly matured significantly over the last 10 or 12 years. And so one thing that we looked at recently is some of the new international standards, which obviously quite a few people have been engaged in the development as well as implementation of the overall ISO 19650 framework that's documented in the information management standards put forth by ISO. And so this framework, I'm sure some of you are familiar with this framework, but it really looks at the overall information management process, both in the delivery and in the asset or operational phase of that project. The ISO framework and information management standards have multiple parts to them. Again, they're focused on this information management, both for buildings as well as other civil engineering works. The different parts of the standard include an overall concept and principles, the delivery phase of the asset on how we manage our information specifically within teams that are delivering projects. And part 3 is focused on the operational phase and how an owner or a client manages the information management at the operational phase. It's a new information exchange part, as well as a security standard for making sure that that information is secure and protected as needed throughout the overarching delivery of a project. I want to really focus on the delivery phase because that's really the focus of the BIM execution planning procedure, was on how we organize the delivery phase so that a project team can efficiently deliver a project, as well as efficiently deliver the information from that project that could be transitioned to the owner. ISO 19650 Part 2 outlines this delivery process. I'm going to switch images here, but I just wanted to identify this. These are the 8 steps in the ISO standard, and I'm going to bring up a diagram in the future that has those same 8 steps, just visually organized a bit differently. Was interesting, within the ISO standard, they did redefine what a BIM execution plan is. I have to admit, this has caused some discussion and debate within our US national BIM standard initiatives related to what exactly is a BIM execution plan and what information should be contained within that plan at various states throughout a project. So ISO defined the BIM execution plan as a plan that explains how the information management aspects of the appointment, an appointment is essentially a scope of work between the lead appointing party and an appointed party. And so this is essentially a contract in some of the terminology that we would use between an owner and one of the key project delivery team members, whether that's a designer or constructor on that project. And so the BIM execution plan in ISO really says that this is an information management aspects associated with the appointment that will be carried out by the delivery team. They also included an additional level of detail that was a task information delivery plan. It looks at a schedule of information containers. Think of an information exchange. Schedule of information containers and delivery dates for specific task teams on a project. And so these are the 8 steps that are defined in ISO, starting with initially the assessment of information needs. And then there are 2 of them in procurement, of doing an invitation to tender and getting tender responses. And then there are 2 steps in the planning phase for information management, just putting in place an appointment and mobilizing. And then there's the actual modeling or information production task. This is actually implementing that plan to create the information as a collaborative production of information, and then information model delivery of getting the final deliverables together, and then having a project closeout where these would be transmitted to the owner for their review. So I think these 8 steps, I think there's some really positive things about ISO 19650 in outlining this overarching framework that documents this clear information management strategy and set of steps. But what I want to focus on is looking at these steps and the detailed aspects of these steps as they're defined in ISO and how they relate to our BIM execution planning procedure. And I would say that quite a few of the steps within ISO align with what we had previously documented within the BIM execution planning procedure, and that we would have in some of the core templates for a collaborative BIM execution plan. We'll start with the assessment of needs, where there was a definition of 8 sub-steps in this, looking at how a project team sets out their information requirements, or how an owner, I guess, sets out their project information requirements, their milestones, their standards, their production methods, their reference information, like a standard BIM library that they may wish to use. What is their common data environment that they want this information to be housed in, and an overall information protocol or templated contract. By the way, the items in red here are items that we would carry in a typical BIM execution plan here within the US National BIM standard version of that. And then the owner goes out to procure the different parties, the different appointed parties for a project, whether that be the designer or the constructors. And they put out an invitation to tender. I think this is an interesting point. We have not seen a whole lot of BIM execution plans developed at this early stage where the owner is putting out their requirements, but we've seen some great examples of that where owners have developed detailed templated BIM execution plans that they can share with people who are going to bid on their projects, so that when they bid the projects, they know what the owner requirements are and they embed them within their overarching plan. And so this is really focused on this invitation to tender, where we assemble this reference information and we share this with parties who are going to bid or provide a proposal for the project. Then there's a tender response where the team, the delivery team, proposes how they want to implement that plan. They establish their delivery team's mobilization plan. They establish a risk register, which, by the way, we had never had a risk register in our BEP standards, and we are leveraging this from ISO to incorporate them into some of our standard approaches as well. And then this party is appointed, where they confirm their execution plan, they establish a responsibility matrix, and put in place their detailed exchange requirements. They would also establish these detailed task information delivery plans and a master delivery plan. I'm not going to go into the other 4 stages of this, because it really focuses on how we then take that plan and start to implement it in mobilizing, creating models, having these models exchanged, and ultimately moving toward project closeout. But I wanted to cover that aspect of ISO 19650, because I think it's important as we think about these 2 different kind of approaches or frameworks that are out there looking at planning for BIM adoption on a project. And so just some observations. When we look at the BIM execution planning guide and the procedure that's within that guide, it's really focused on just how we put together these collaborative BIM execution plans. And when I say collaborative, I mean, how do we get everybody from the project team together to be able to develop a single plan in order to deliver this information throughout the life cycle? ISO 19650 is much broader. Certainly has aspects of how does the owner identify their information needs, and how do they make sure that they get those needs throughout the overall delivery of a project. So it provides that high-level framework on how an owner and a delivery team should go about that process. Our BIM execution planning approach really is a use case centric approach. Identify what BIM uses do you want to implement. For example, those uses that I talked about in the very beginning of this presentation of authoring a design, 3D coordination, etc. So what use cases are we going to implement, and how are we going to organize them to be successful? ISO 19650 is very information management centric. What information does somebody need, and when do they need it? And so that is extremely valuable, but it's not highly use case centric in the way it's initially presented. Not to say that that doesn't exist within it. It is just the presentation of it is extremely information management centric. A third observation is our planning procedure is admittedly simply project focused. It's looking at how does a project team organize and deliver the information that they need on a project to support the overall project goals. ISO 19650 is broader, looking at how does an organization manage their information strategy. We actually have a separate guide that talks about that, but I do think the ISO framework is very good at communicating the importance of the owner identifying their information needs, communicating those needs to the team, and then having the team deliver to those needs. Another observation is that our planning procedure really tries to highlight the importance of the collaborative nature of this planning process. I think the best successes of BIM adoption that we've seen are on more integrated delivery approaches to projects. Not to say that you can't adopt BIM on, for example, design, bid, build projects, but if we look at delivery approaches like design, build, or integrated project delivery, it really opens the door to an extensive integration of BIM throughout the entire process. The ISO framework is, if literally adopted, is quite a transactional framework where you identify each contractor or each appointed party has their own unique BIM plan and their own unique tasks and deliverables that they deliver to. And so it's a clearly defined transactional framework that I think works well within a legal structure, but doesn't necessarily take advantage of the collaborative nature unless people overlay that collaboration on top of this process or framework. And then we put together a template to leverage in the creation of this BIM execution plan. ISO was never made or meant to be a template. So this is, and by the way, I'm not putting these observations out there as critique or criticism of either approach, but just as kind of an informational thing where the ISO framework was really never envisioned to be a template, although we see some great work coming out of, for example, the UK BIM framework and some of their templates and items that are being put together in different markets to help implement the ISO 19650 framework. And so with this new framework, and this is kind of some reflection that we've been doing here in both our research group as well as our BIM execution planning work group within the national BIM standard within the United States, we've been reflecting on what's new in ISO 19650. How can we leverage this to really improve the overall BIM execution planning procedure on these projects? And so I'll take 1 or 2 minutes just to give you a brief update on the US National BIM Standard efforts. And we've more frequently, the last version, by the way, the US National BIM Standard was released in 2015, which is in BIM years a very long time ago. And so one of the things that we've been doing over the last 3 years is putting together a framework, a structure, work groups, and an overall vision and structure to develop the next version of the US National BIM Standard, which will be significantly different than our previous versions of the National BIM Standard. And we set out, you'll notice a couple of name changes here for the National Building Information Management instead of modeling standard and guidelines. And our goal is really to put together a clear set of standards and guidelines that can be used by owners and teams to define their requirements, procure the services needed to be successful, and enable teams to effectively deliver. And so within this guideline, we also looked at how can we frame and leverage these national BIM standards relative to what is going on in the marketplace. And this is a diagram taken from a more recent initiative that we're developing at this time, which is the U.S. National BIM program, looking at how we can leverage these international standards such as ISO 19650, as well as other open information exchange standards like IFCs and model view definitions, how we can leverage all of these international standards within our own US national BIM standard, and really identify several core areas of focus for the standard at this time. And that's setting in place a set of core expected BIM requirements that make it easy for owners to adopt BIM requirements into their delivery process. Putting together an efficient BIM planning procedure, leveraging some of our BIM execution planning content. Helping to define this level of development or model specifications. And we have some other items that we're embedding in this, an update of COBE. Some of you may be familiar with construction to building operations. Information exchange, this is really that final handoff from the project team to the owner for the operations process. It's a bit more than that, but that's maybe the easiest way to look at it. And then in the future, we'll be creating additional modules. And our overarching goal is to get these BIM requirements down to a level where people can easily contract for these services. And we have a series of guidelines and templates that enable quick adoption of them. We're also working with some of our standard legal contractual arrangements and others to make it easy for those entities to reference these BIM standards. And so I'm just going to take just the BEP portion of the next version of the National BIM standard. And what we're doing right now is that we have gone back and taken a fresh look at all of the content areas within a BIM execution plan. We evaluated and studied many different BIM execution planning templates that people have adopted around the world, and really extracted the core content that we felt was most valuable out of each of those approaches. We leveraged the ISO framework to really break this process down into making a recommendation that we should have a pre-proposal BIM execution plan that an owner takes the lead on to define what they would expect to see as minimum requirements within the BIM program for that project. And then having everyone who proposes on the project to add to that pre-proposal BEP their specific recommendations, and then to put together a collaborative final single BIM execution plan for that project. And then we would embed these information requirements into the pre-proposal BIM execution plan so that an owner can say, hey, here are our information exchange requirements that we need for this project. And that gives a starting point for the team to deliver. And we are aligning some of the terminology as well as processes with the ISO process, so that as people go through the steps and stages of this BIM execution planning procedure, they'll essentially be completing the various sub-steps that are identified within many of the ISO initial 4 steps in their process. And so just some concluding thoughts. One is, I think ISO 19650 has elevated the conversation of having clear information requirements for projects, and that owners define initially what are those information requirements, and the project team continues to build upon that. And I think that's really important. I think the BIM execution planning process and procedure should really focus on designing the process to be able to deliver to those information requirements. And I also feel fairly strongly that we should, on a project, aim to have a single BIM execution plan that takes into account the multiple initiatives and plans of different organizations, but really integrates them together so that we're sure that everybody's process works in concert with others, as opposed to having, for example, a design BEP and a construction BEP, or even worse, when we have multiple prime contractors where we could have a significant number of varied BIM execution plans that we may not be sure if they plug together well. And so that really requires this need for collaboration. We need to build flexibility into this process so that the plan can be modified and updated as we continue. And all of this really requires collaboration. And I think collaboration of the team members is what is so critical for BIM adoption to be successful. And putting in place a collaborative BEP development process really gives you that mechanism to get people to talk and to share their ideas and to share a common understanding of the BIM process and why you want to do that. And so with that, I just want to thank all of you for joining here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And Sergio, thank you again so much for inviting me to talk here today. We have a lot of people that support our program here, and I'm so appreciative of that. So with that, thank you so much. And I would be glad to take any questions or have any discussion that you'd like.
Yeah, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, John. A great value for us. I have a question here from Howard Flores. He's asking about, I think, a picture that you showed about a book using models in construction, a planning guide. He's asking what is this about and if it's available.
So that is a Construction Industry Institute research project that we did for CII. It focuses more, we pretty much leverage a similar planning procedure, but more targeted on the construction use cases. It is available on CII's website. I can forward that link to you. It is one of the resources that we, because of the copyright on it and the work that we did for CII, that we don't publicly post on our website, but would need to be picked up from the CII website. So I can find and post a link to that.
So thank you. We appreciate it. So I don't have any other questions so far. If any of the audience want to interact directly with John Messner, please raise your hand and I will open your mic and you can ask directly. I have a question for you, John. Here in our context, there is a strong belief that the owner or the appointing party is the one who needs to define the BIM execution plan. However, you say in your presentation that is a BIM process to define the BIM execution plan. So can you elaborate more on this? Or what do you think about our strong belief that the owner is the one that is responsible for creating the BIM execution plan? And it's very common that in some projects, when you participate in the project, there is already a well-defined and complete BIM information, BIM execution plan. Is this the right approach?
So what we do, or what I think, a number of owners that have a good process in place, what they do is put in place a template initial BIM execution plan that ensures that they get what they really want out of the process. So it may include their information exchange requirements. Here's what we want to go into our asset management plan. Here's what we want as a record model for the project. And it may even say, hey, like ours says, we want you to use 3D coordination. It's not an option, it is a requirement. So it outlines those set of BIM requirements from the owner's perspective. But the team then uses that initial set of requirements and builds their own collaborative plan from that, and outlines they may have optional BIM uses. Maybe they want to adopt 4D modeling. The owner may not care, but that may be beneficial to them to plan out construction sequences and so forth. So we have plenty of BIM execution plans here where the owner starts with a set of requirements, embeds them in the BEP, but that BEP then matures as teams respond to proposals and as the teams get together to talk about what they're going to do and how they can share their information with the follow-on parties. And so I think the owner absolutely has to take responsibility for setting in place the minimum requirements that they expect from the team. And that is so critical. But if that's all the team delivers, I think they leave a lot of things on the table where they could do so much better. And so I think it's important for the team collectively to update that plan and make sure that it reflects it.
Wonderful answer, John. So Roberto Sanchez is raising your hand, so you can ask your question directly. Yeah.
John, thank you for your lecture. Very, very interesting. Your point of view in this matter, transformation, the way we do the things in certain industry, let's say building industry. At least in Mexico has been the people have been reluctant to adopt this methodology. My question is, do you think that the BIM professional, the BIM director, manager, whatever you want to call him or her, will take the place of the project manager in the next time, or what is needed to become this situation in actual projects, in most of the projects? Thank you very much. I close my mic.
Yeah, thank you, Roberto. So I think that's a great question. I don't think the BIM manager is going to take the role of a project management staff. I view the BIM management function as a core function that needs to be performed on projects. And that can be performed by a number of individuals. I think there's always an interesting debate on the human resource side about who should manage this information, how's it best managed on projects? Do we need a BIM manager on a project, or should it be the project manager who does some information management tasks, or the project engineer here? And this may be more specific to the organizational structure of some of our projects, but really looking at how do we assign this task of information management to a party on the project. And it could be distributed across what we think of as our traditional roles. A designer has some information management tasks, the project manager has them. And then we may have these separate information managers who are also supporting the process, whether they're within organizations or a third party. There are a lot of people now pushing having third-party solutions that help manage this information. But I think whatever it is, I think we've seen an elevation of the importance of this information management task, which I think is long overdue. And we've always managed information on projects. Now it's digital, and now we need to manage it in a different way. And so I think we'll see this as more of a distributed task with some expertise, where we have information managers who really help guide this process, just like we see in cost management and schedule management and all of the other avenues of a project that we need to manage. But this information management task is so important and is changing so much as we move to more digital information.
Thank you. Francisco Jimenez, if you want to unmute your mic.
Yes, thank you. John, you said that we should have one BEP. And well, I think the same, but it would be think as an organization for the organizational goal or for the project goal, or we should have an BEP template to apply on all the projects that we should have. And well, thank you for the lecture. This was amazing, and it's an honor to meet you.
Thanks, Francisco. So I think one way to view this, and what I personally feel is the best approach at this time, is that an owner plans out what their core requirements are for any project. And then when there is a specific project, they may update their requirements for that specific project, given the project conditions. But that owner has a templated execution plan of a set of minimum requirements that they would expect to see on any project. And then they share that plan at a project level with the team when they go out to look for the team. The teams will respond to that, but ultimately the teams will contribute to that and develop a more robust individual project plan that is at a project level. So, for example, here at Penn State, and I'll be honest, we're not exactly there right now. We have a design and a construction BEP because of some of the challenges in some of these areas. I keep pushing for us to move toward a single BEP, but we have templates that say, here's what we would expect as minimum requirements, here's our ultimate deliverables, and team, please put together and add to this what additional items you'll do, or the specifics of how you'll do it. We for some areas we say, use this specific application. For others, we just say, we want you to use this BIM use. We don't necessarily define a software product or other details about how to do it. That would be the team's means and methods on how they decide they want to implement. And so I think ultimately it's ideal to put that vision out there to get that final BEP that's coordinated across all the organizations. But admittedly, it's challenging, especially if you don't have a more integrated delivery approach.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have another question that is related to the last one from Francisco. This is from Elias Tavera. And he said, how fast has been the adoption of the BIM process, the BIM execution plan, in the design and in the construction stage since 2008 in the USA? And if you have found any barriers, how do you overcome those barriers?
So I think a large number of projects now have BIM execution plans here in the United States. How fast it occurred, I think, depended upon what market you look at. So we worked really closely with our BIM execution planning template with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers here in the U.S. And if you're not familiar with the Army Corps of Engineers, they're one of the biggest project management arms within the government that help manage capital facilities, not just for the Army, but across quite a few organizations. And so they immediately put in place our BIM execution plan requirements when we released them. And that really helped launch broad adoption amongst a lot of parties of this practice. And I think once people saw it, they saw the value in making sure that they had a plan. With that said, there are plenty of variants to our templated plan, many variants to it, which is what we looked at more recently of how similar are they. A lot of them have a lot of commonalities. Some of them have a lot of optional things. For example, the process mapping that is so near and dear to my heart. I love it. I think it's critical. A lot of people don't require it. And so there are variations of the requirements of BEPs on projects. But I think in general, a large number of the bigger owners have a BIM execution planning requirement, and almost all owners that require BIM are now starting to require these BEPs in some format. And we're going to see more and more of this embedded into contractual requirements and so forth, but it's already quite prevalent on BIM projects.
Thank you for your answer. Fernanda Icaza, you want to ask your question directly?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Messner, for the excellent symposium. You are known in your country for having a great knowledge and ability to explain BIM topics inside and out of the classrooms of the best colleges in America. Knowing this and knowing how that kind of public thinks or manages different architectural aspects, would you consider BIM integration processes applied in America, London, or what we know as first world countries should be applied equally to third world countries, or should we start evaluating and designing different methods to integrate BIM in different economic environments?
That's an interesting question. I have to think about that a little. I mean, I think there is huge value in BIM adoption regardless of the economic conditions of a market. Although certainly I'm sure that there are varied constraints to that adoption. I mean, I'm well aware that some of the tools and techniques that certain countries use can be expensive to implement. Although there continue to be more and more open source or other avenues to leverage for that adoption. But I think we have seen such value in the adoption of BIM within the U.S. market that we're seeing a very, very significant shift, or have seen, I think it's more accurate, to using BIM on projects. But with that said, certainly not all BIM use cases. I mean, we have list of use cases of 50 BIM uses. And I think what we tried to push in the BIM execution planning procedure is what makes sense for you on the project. And maybe that's one way to view this is, I think authoring a design in a modeling tool, in a parametric modeling tool that's intelligent is incredibly important, as opposed to using CAD or other drawing techniques. And so I think that, authoring that design and coordinating that design are important. Maybe some of the more advanced use cases, we still don't see a lot of those more advanced use cases on projects that I see in different marketplaces. So I think it probably may come down to which use cases of BIM would provide the most value in different markets relative to kind of the cost and constraints of being able to adopt. I think one of the other challenges is education. Education's incredibly important for being effective in using these tools, and it there's a huge need for it throughout all markets.
Good, thank you, John. And I told you to be prepared for difficult questions. So I have another that is maybe even more difficult to answer, but. And Maria Los Angeles Caripa is asking, what is your time frame estimation for a Latin American country to fully implement BIM as a mandatory requirement for the public works?
Yeah, that is a difficult question.
Yeah, I know.
And you know, when you have record turned on, I never like to make predictions on time because that's always a difficult one.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Someone can pull out like that old email, right, Sergio, and say,
yeah.
"Hey, you."
That's right.
So,
that's right.
yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. What I can say is I have been incredibly pleased with seeing around the world the different initiatives of owners getting interested in BIM. And so and maybe a shift from, 15 years ago when we were doing BIM research, it was almost all buildings, right? There wasn't even a conversation of transportation, although certainly they had their digital tools. But now we're seeing the public works, especially transportation, bridges, other infrastructure, rail, getting heavily involved and interested in BIM requirements because they are starting to see the benefits both in the delivery but also in the operational digital twins, which I think is a lofty long-term goal and one that will provide significant value, but we've got a long way to go to get to that place. And so I do hope that around the world we see the large public works, large both building and infrastructure owners, whether they be public or private, adopting BIM requirements. I think we're seeing more of it here in the United States, although still in some markets very sporadic. Our departments of transportation are starting to adopt BIM. They've always done modeling, but they're starting to get more mature in how they look at the information management process. So I think you noticed I avoided a timeline, but I'm hoping that efforts in the next 5 years will make a big dent in putting in place those requirements. But it is a difficult task. Admittedly, I've worked with a number of owners in their adoption strategies and strategic planning, and it's admittedly I understand why it takes a while for owners to transition, and but I think it's an important road to go down.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. So I have another question now that you mentioned the education that is related with that. This is from Erica Canche. She is actually one of my students here at the Autonomous University of Yucatan. So he's asking, what is the best way to implement BIM in the academic curricula? So I know that you have a lot of experience on that.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I'm not sure there's one best way to implement BIM in an academic curricula. We have multiple programs here at Penn State. I teach out of the architectural engineering program. So that's really focused on engineering students, not architects, but engineering students who are learning the engineering design process and construction, as well as learning a bit about architecture. in architectural design studios. And so that's really our curriculum, is to teach awareness in some basics of architectural design, but really focused on engineered systems, engineering analysis, and construction planning and analysis. So in our program, what we do is we start in their second year. We teach them how to use advanced BIM modeling tools, like and certainly not advocating for any software, but we have our students learn Revit in the second year. They learn some other 3D viewing tools, and then we have a 5-year program. So in their third and fourth and fifth years, they're then using more analysis tools, 4D modeling tools, energy modeling, lighting design. But we teach that foundational architectural design modeling very early so that they can use those models as they go through and do more things. And then we overlay that with, teaching them the BIM execution planning process, teaching them about, reality capture technologies and things like that don't really specifically align with any of their main curriculum. But we embed those in other courses. And then ultimately, I have a graduate BIM execution planning class. I have a graduate immersive technologies class on the visualization side. We have a number of other faculty member with graduate level courses in different analytics or parametric modeling or graph theory that tie into BIM. So those are, more advanced topics that our students would get later on in the program. So that's how we do it in architectural engineering. We started more than 15 years ago now in embedding BIM into the curriculum. But it's very different in some of our other programs like architecture. They also have it pretty embedded, but obviously they are more focused on the architectural aspects of it. And then civil engineering, which we also have, it's introduced much later in their curriculum. And so it really depends on the program, but we found it to be pretty instrumental to how we teach a lot of our topics, since we're involved in so many digital analytics applications.
Yeah, in regards of that, I teach BIM at the graduate program at the WPI Worcester Polytechnic Institute in the civil engineering, the construction management program. And when at the beginning of the course, they are really familiar with the models and the 3D coordination and all the low-hanging fruits, as you said before, of the BIM implementation. But once we get into the BIM execution plan, for many of them, it's a new thing. It's a new thing they never hear before, even when they are using BIM forever in their companies they are working for, or their own companies. So do you think this is a representation of what is happening nationwide in the US, or is just my case that the BIM execution plan is something new still for many of the people that are actually doing BIM?
Yeah, the actual implementers. It's possible. Certainly, I think there are a series of people that develop these plans, and each of the companies tends to have some experts who really are engaged in the early conversations in the development of these VPs. But on the implementation side, if you're a designer or a construction manager, you may only be involved in one or two BIM use cases, whether it's 4D modeling or 3D coordination. So they may not come in contact nearly as frequently with a BIM execution plan or know how to develop one. But instead, hopefully, Sergio, I'd be interested in you doing this, asking them, how many of you have seen the BIM execution plan on the project that you've worked on? So you would hope that that's communicated across the team, but I'm sure in a number of projects it's not, right? That they lay out a plan and maybe not everybody is exposed to that plan.
Yeah, and I find that fact very interesting because I plan an assignment where they need to develop a BIM execution plan. And they say, oh yeah, this is new for me. I have never before, and I see the benefits on it. So it's interesting. Yeah. So Christoph Kiermaier, can you unmute your mic and do your questions?
Hi, John. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. That was great. And also, it is an honor for us to having you here with us, sharing your knowledge. Well, my question goes directly to the beginning of your presentation. You have this slide, you brought us this slide that you said that BIM is the glue between sustainability and integrated delivery. And in that moment, I was captured with that word, with one word that I want you to explain us in the very fundamentals. This question goes more to the people, professionals, and also to the students. And I want to explain. I want you to explain us, how can we start having an integrated approach in the most basic way and a practical way in our companies? I'm asking about the integrated work.
So do you want me to address that first, Krista?
Yeah, it's just a suggestion. Can you give us a suggestion about how can we begin with integrated delivery and work?
Yeah, I think, and I think there's been a long transition that is by no means anywhere near complete within the US market right now to try to get more integrated delivery, not specifically within an organization, but the delivery method used on the project, whether it's, for example, design bid build or design build, or now lots of people talking about integrated project delivery. To be honest, it's not a huge market in the United States. IPD is a pretty extreme contractual approach that brings with it lots of potential benefits, but fraught with lots of challenges in implementation. And so I'm a huge supporter of IPD, but it requires a whole new way to view the process and a whole new set of team members with a different attitude toward the delivery of a project. So I think, we've here at Penn State, just to use Penn State as an example, we used to do a lot of design bid build. We've transitioned to almost all CM agency over time, where we're getting a construction manager involved early. And then we started getting like the mechanical and electrical trades involved early on early contracts. And now we do more, some design build projects where we're, actually contracting out with the designer builder in one contract. And I think those contractual mechanisms are important, but setting in place the expectation of collaboration is, I think, the most important thing. And it's difficult. I mean, I've seen, and we've done delivery method research here, and we've seen highly successful construction management contracts and highly successful IPD contracts, and not so successful ones, right? So it's not the only variable, but I think as we move to more integrated approaches, we can really exploit BIM a lot more and get the contractor involved early. We can do things like prefabrication. We can do strategies that, if it's independently designed before you get a contractor on board, you can forget advanced modularization and a whole lot of other things that really make the process efficient.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of noise in this regard of the IPD, because many projects are advertised in the implementation as IPD. when it's really a construction management a risk or design construction. And maybe this is what John Toshi used to call IPD-ish approach. Instead of the real IPD that is really complex, that involves 11 type of contracts, with you waive your right to sue the other guys. So it's really complex, and I think there are two different things: the construction management at risk and the design build. They are good intentions to collaborate, and that's it. I'm agree with you.
I agree with that. I think we have a lot of people that say they have IPD, but they're not.
They're not.
Or design build. I have to admit, I give my students every year, they have an assignment to go out, talk to a team and come back on what the delivery method is. A lot of people from industry will tell them it's design build because they're designing and building at the same time, as opposed to a real design build contract where they're under a single agreement. So I think there is a lot of noise in the delivery approaches.
Okay, Roberto, you can ask your question.
Thank you. John, again, hearing you the last comment. Sometimes we as a designers, I am a ICT system designer, we thought that our thoughts and ideas setting in a design are the best thing that anyone can follow. Saying this, and because the buildings will stay 30, 40, maybe 50 years ahead, the operational stage of the building life is the most important. The methodology have the possibility for following the operational and maintenance stage. My question, what do you think with this, that is not very new, idea of metaverse and digital twins with BIM? What are your point of view? Thanks.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for setting me up for another passion of mine to talk about. So, I mean, I think, I think there are some really interesting questions out there right now relative to digital twins. I'll talk about maybe digital twins first, and then I'll refer to the metaverse. But I think, this whole concept of digital twins has been interesting to me, coming from another, the term coming from another industry or set of industries. So I think it's really provided an avenue for us to rethink what our operational models may be, or maybe I'll use a term that's more frequently used here in the US by National Science Foundation of the cyber physical systems kind of terminology of how do we create a cyber representation and a physical representation and have them talk back and forth to each other and be able to actuate things in the real world. And so I think digital twin is I have to admit, I think there's an intriguing debate going on terminology right now related to what is a digital twin and what is BIM, and now some people are saying BIM to twin, and how do we move from a building information model to a digital twin. I think a lot of those concepts were envisioned by some in BIM as part of BIM, but I think an operational digital twin and the ability for us to rethink the operational use cases of how to tie our digital asset to the real world asset is a really interesting item. Certainly one that we're looking at here at the university. as far as, you know, even our own operational systems. How can we get better information? How can we integrate it better into this operational twin? So I'll just say that I couldn't agree more that our ability to create effective digital representations of our built environment for the operations process is critical and will allow us to do a lot of additional things. Regarding the metaverse, it's something that is intriguingly on the news every morning these days, it seems, something related to the metaverse. I think one of the classes I teach is a virtual prototyping class, and we talk about virtual worlds, how people engage in and interact in those virtual spaces. So I think for the short-term future, I think, you know, these virtual worlds may provide us a new way of collaboration where we can interact with our digital content in different ways in collaborative environments and spaces. So I'm, as with many people, looking forward to the long term and seeing which direction they take and how much time someone wants to live in a real world versus a virtual world. So I think there's a lot of interesting items there, and I'm wondering how many people are going to be able to really leverage these virtual worlds to do virtual architecture in them, and the value of creating a marketplace there for the development of virtual assets.
Wow, we have the topic for your presentation. Okay, Elias, go ahead.
Thank you, Sergio. Hi, John. Let me make the following question. There are some process or format like a checklist to verify the quality of BIM information models based on the BIM uses for getting a quantitative or qualitative grade for check the quality of the information.
So are there, is that the question? Are there these templates?
Yes, if there are some checklists that we follow up or something else to give us an idea.
So, you know, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has in their implementation documents, they do have some checklists, albeit not a whole lot that I'm aware of, but they have, for example, checklists on, you know, what makes a good BIM execution plan, what's interference management, what are the deliverables for interference management, which, by the way, is their terminology for 3D coordination. So they have a couple of checklists. Some people run models through automated model checkers and identify, you know, whether a model has the right information in it, whether there are clashes in it, if that's the goal of the check. We here at the university, that's what we do. We take data and run it through some automated checks, just to see if it's reasonable. It's a really interesting question on a quality control side of how you check a model, because there's varying levels to be able to do that. Obviously, first one is it, can you even open it, which some people unfortunately don't even check. And so, you know, can you open it? Is it a proper model? Does it have the content in it? Is the content within a reasonable range? Like if it's a number, is it a number or is it text? If it's a number, does it fit within a range that you would expect the number to be in? And then ultimately, like, is it right? So to check models for whether or not they are right is a difficult task. So we usually get down, for our operations models, we get down to, is the information there? Is it comprehensive? And is the information in the range we would expect it? And if it's a really important piece of data, then we'll individually check this to make sure they're right.
Okay, thank you very much, John.
Okay, Montserrat, go ahead.
Hi. Okay, so thank you for the presentation and for the clarity in teaching and detailing the BIM execution plan. I have a question. I understand that in the world there are different social, political, and economic contexts, also different personalities or ways to think. What is the point of origin to develop a BIM execution plan? I mean, actually, I'm living in Toronto. Toronto is a multicultural city and people came here from all over the world. And all of us, we have the same question, where we have to start. If in our country, we were taught to do things in a certain way. I mean, even the construction systems are not the same.
So maybe I could ask a clarification of the question. So I got the point
like,
of coming from different places and different contexts. What is the challenge that
what is the point of origin to develop a BIM execution plan if in our country, for example, in Mexico, I came from Mexico, we learn one thing, one way, and one system construction, and we start here in Canada, and everything is different. The Ontario Building Code, the construction, everything is different. Even the plan execution, BIM. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly a BIM execution plan is not going to solve some of those challenges, but I think from the information management perspective, I think one key is to make sure that everybody has that collaborative conversation on how the information, how the models they create, or what models should they create? What information should they create? And then once they create it, how can they share it with others for others to gain benefit from that information? And so I think certainly not necessarily going to solve some of the methods problems and differences in delivery, but I do think that the BIM execution planning process can help add clarity to what kind of information everybody needs at different stages to be able to be successful. I hope that answered your question. Or if you have any other clarification you want to add.
It's okay, no problem.
Yeah, I have some people in the YouTube channel asking on how to get the national BIM standards. So it's a quite easy process. You want to explain it?
Yeah, so the US, I'll give you two answers. So at this time, the current version is US National BIM Standard version 3.0. Let me Google this really quickly and I'll put it in the chat so you can share it. So if you just put into Google US National BIM Standard, it'll come up, and then you can go to this website that I'll put in this chat. I don't know, Sergio, I don't have the YouTube channel open, but if you go to that website, you do need to sign up for a free account. Don't worry, it's not going to spam you or anything. But sign up for a free account, and then you can get into the National BIM Standard. With that said, that'll give you a series of chapters that you can download for the National BIM Standard. One of those chapters is the BIM execution planning procedure. There are many other chapters like Kobe and a lot of different chapters to that. In the future, we're redrafting a version 4. It will have significantly different and more concise content to it. We're hopefully within the next couple of months, we'll be releasing public drafts of that for feedback from the international community. And so, keep your eye out if you do sign up there. We'll be sending out a notice to people to let them know that there are drafts of version 4 for comment, and then that's going to go through balloting, revisions and balloting later this year.
Yeah, thank you. We will include the link in the website of the seminar, so people can have it from there. So a question that I have no other question for the audience. A question that I had, you already answered, is what is the time frame to be released for the version number 4 of the National BIM standard? So you already told that 2 months is the window frame for some of the preliminary versions of this standard. So we're looking forward to see it.
Yeah, and they'll be different. What we'll release is a series of attributes and elements that should be in a BIM plan at different stages. And so before we had this template in Microsoft Word and people could leverage that template. So we are going to create a template, but I think the key here is what information needs to be in a BIM plan when it's developed and used. And so hopefully that'll add clarity to that.
Okay, Aurora, go ahead, please. Open your mic and you can ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this wonderful conference, Mr. Messner. I want to ask you if you have some research about the stage of the architectural design so that the design can fit for a good construction process in BIM.
Yeah, relative to the maybe a clarification relative to the quality of the design or type of design. What aspect of the design are you referencing?
Just the quality of design and the architectural design can be the good quality for construction and for the rest of the stages.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think. Has not been an area of focus specifically for our research. Trying to think of other researchers. Certainly, there have been people who have looked at the value of leveraging BIM to do the design process so that the quality of those designs can be better. I can say the one thing that we've really leveraged BIM for at the university is to do much higher quality design reviews. And so we'll bring, it's standard practice right now at Penn State that we'll bring our design models into the immersive construction lab here at Penn State. We have a large 3-screen display. It's actually kind of hidden in the blue background here. You can see the 3 screens. That's our immersive construction lab. We will bring design models into there. The team will walk end users, they'll walk the maintenance staff, they'll walk the administrators through the design model and get feedback on that design. So I think that's not relative to the details of the quality of the model itself, but I think what it does do is it gets that feedback from a diverse user group that has historically been more challenging to get feedback from. And if you give them a set of plans and specs, or even a couple of 3D static renderings, you may not get the same level of feedback as walking through a 3D model, which I think is just so valuable and is one of the key reasons that we require all of our models to be created in a BIM authoring tool.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So it's almost time to close, and I want to finish with one question of my own, a difficult one. So you say in your presentation that you are planning to add flexibility in your new edition of the standards and the guide. How are you going to achieve that?
So I think one of the things, maybe if I put in flexibility there, is just a recognition of the need to allow for change in the process once you've put a plan in place. How would we do that? I mean, we're not going to be able to do that just by standard. I think it's an interplay between how you set requirements and how you enable collaboration to take place on a project. And so I think, we have always tried to push that it's incredibly valuable to have a BIM execution plan. It's very important to lay it out at the beginning of the project, but it's always, and maybe equally as important, to realize that it may need to change as you go through the process. And so I think the standards themselves probably won't enable that flexibility, but I think the administration of how you put in place requirements that allow you to change and allow you to adapt and innovate as you go through the process is just critical.
Yeah, because BIM execution plan is a living document that is evolving in the different stages, and as the project is evolving, this document has also evolving. So that's good. That's interesting. I'm looking forward to see the new edition of your standards. So John, I want to thank you, and I want just to play here on the screen your certificate of acknowledgement.
Oh,
this is the digital version, and I will send it to you by email after this. After we close this presentation. And we are really honored to have you here. I'm really grateful. We are really grateful that you find some window in your very tight schedule to be here with us for a couple of hours. So thank you very much, John. We really appreciate your participation.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation to share, and also for all of the great questions. If I can ever be of any support, please feel free to reach out to me. But again, it's been a real pleasure. And Sergio, thanks so much for the invitation.
Thanks to you. So see you on a couple of weeks. The next presentation is, I think I have it right here. Let me present it to you. Is Carolina Ramirez from Autodesk Expert Lead from Spain. I think he's actually right here in the audience, or she was right here. So I see you in a couple of weeks, and thank you all for being here. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.